in your sport, there comes a point where if you're not in that place, you're almost kind of scared of a start line. You know, if I'm like, I'm going to go run this trail marathon tomorrow. I know there are a lot of other fast women out there. I'm not a fast person. Like, do I even want to risk the ego hit by getting out there? But like, you can say that for anywhere. Like if I keep telling myself, I'm just never going to get back to a start line. So I think for me, I actually sometimes he helps push me and be like, remember what racing is about. You know, it's not about winning necessarily. Like that's like, but like, it's all that journey, you know, and that celebration.
Yo. Hey, man.
Welcome to the BeRad podcast. My name's Kat Bradley, your host, and I'm sitting here with Amelia Boone, who I've known kind of for years. Champion obstacle course racer, ultra runner, dog mom, eating disorder advocate. I was, going through your website right before this, like 20 minutes ago, and I was like, I wonder what she describes herself as now. I feel like, since I've known you, even in the last like 6 years or so, you've evolved so much. So how would you describe yourself now?
Yeah, that's actually a really hard question because like, what do you lead with? And I think that's true. I think for many years of my life, I'd be like, oh, I'm like an obstacle racer. And then I kind of transitioned to ultra running, but I've always been an attorney the entire time.
Yeah.
And then also I think just how I relate to the world and to other people has changed as well, because I think I also used to be very kind of like closed off. People saw me as like an athlete to be feared and not really like anyone who would show any kind of vulnerability. And then I turned that on its head a few years ago by just talking about everything that I had been through, in terms of eating disorder recovery.
Yeah.
So I like to think that I'm just like a constantly evolving person and that we should celebrate that because in other ways, I think that we pigeonhole ourselves too much into saying like, this is who I am and I have to be this person for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of seeing what comes up and taking it from there.
Yeah. And, I've always kind of seen you as someone who's been really vulnerable. So that surprises me because even before eating disorder treatment, you went through a bunch of injuries. And, while maybe you weren't vulnerable to the extent that you are now, and there was, a lot left unsaid, did you feel like talking about the injuries was in some way therapeutic, or did you feel like it was hiding behind?
Yeah, that's a good, I think it was therapeutic for me because I think when I was first struck down, I had a stress fracture in my femur. I was supposed to run Western States and that kind of threw it out the window. And then I kept getting injured. And so I think the way for me to try and process it was to talk about it. And now it's funny because looking back, I'm like, I think I was so ashamed of being injured at first. And now I'm like, everyone is injured all the time.
I know.
Like, it's just a lot of people don't talk about it. And, but I do think I was struggling and grasping in that scenario to try and figure out, or to try and not admit to myself why I was getting injured too.
Yeah.
I was trying to say like, validate, I'm doing all these things right. And I don't know why this is happening. Whereas like inside you kind of know, like,
yeah, totally.
I'm not feeding myself appropriately. I'm not doing these things, but you really just don't want to admit it to yourself.
So you on some level, you didn't know you were still in that eating disorder pattern.
I mean, I think I knew. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. I didn't want to, I wanted to write things off as a fluke. And that like, this happens. But the more something happens over and over again, like you can't plead ignorance at that point. And when you've kind of been through everything else and been like, I'm not ramping up my mileage too much. I'm doing all the physical therapy, but like I'm still breaking. And you're like, well, so I kind of got to look deeper.
Inward, yeah.
And especially when you've had, like for me, I had like a lot of success in the obstacle racing world for a very long time when I was actually not taking care of myself well. And so a part of me was like, well, if I wasn't getting injured then like there clearly wasn't a problem. So why is this happening now? But we all know that bodies are really good at like compensating until they're just like, nope, can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Just done.
Yeah. We're getting into some heavy hitters right away.
Sorry, I just jumped straight into it.
I love that. And like, it's great. It's why I wanted to interview you, because you won't like give me half an answer, So that said, when you got into obstacle course racing and, cause you weren't a competitive athlete, right? Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Was it driven by disordered thoughts and patterns?
That's a really interesting question. And no one has actually ever asked me that before. So kudos. I think, so I came from a background, I was hospitalized when I was 16 for an eating disorder. And then I was in residential treatment after college. The reason that I wasn't a competitive athlete is I was too sick to be an athlete. Like doctors were like, you run, you're going to die. And the idea at that point for treatment was just that if you have an eating disorder, you're not allowed to be an athlete. Mm-hmm. Like they just, like in the models in the late 90s, early 2000s, that's just what they thought. So I actually, after I got out of residential treatment before law, so I went through law school, I didn't do any kind of movement really. Mm-hmm. I told myself that like it would be too risky and like I was afraid of getting back into that. So I remember when I started to kind of dabble in just like going to the gym, or I would run a few miles. And I was like, okay, I can like keep this in check. I don't want it to like spin. And I got into obstacle racing when a coworker of mine at my law firm was like, hey, there's this thing called Tough Mudder. We should all run. Mm-hmm. And I just was like, wow, this is new and challenging and sure. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, is this a good idea? And I went out there and I loved it. And I actually was pretty good at it. And so I think at that point I was like, no, I got this, totally handled, like not going to cause any issues. And actually, I think at that point I kind of flipped things on its head. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to be an athlete, if I'm going to run an obstacle race that's 24 hours long, I need to feed myself well. Mm-hmm. And that actually, I mean, I held to that for a long time. But I think as I started to like go further into the sport, and more so when I started to gain some fame and notoriety, and I would be on magazine covers and doing photo shoots, and I started to pick myself apart and things that I never really thought of before. And I think I just slowly started like just the insidious like relapse into that. So I don't believe, and maybe I'm deluding myself, but like I don't believe that there are any kind of motivations in getting into sport like that had to do with the eating disorder. Yeah. But I think that it just created a perfect environment where it would come back, could have come back even if I wasn't an athlete. Probably would have, if you don't address the underlying issues and things like that. So, yeah.
And so it was, your relapse was not performance related. It was based on seeing yourself and having other people see you.
Yeah, I think it was more just being in a sport, in obstacle racing. If you see, just because of the nature of the sport, you are in very little clothing because like you're generally in a sports bra and tiny little compression shorts. And because you don't want mud to stick to you and things like that. And I think I would just line up on the start line and start to like compare myself to other women around me and thinking that I was quote unquote bigger than them. And like, maybe like, and I wanted to more look like an athlete, which is a weird thing. I was also heavily into CrossFit at the time. So I think I saw a lot of like what the CrossFit women look like. And I was like, maybe I should look like that. But I don't know. I mean, and then a part of me is like, maybe it had nothing to do with that. Maybe it also had to do with like, I was engaged and in a relationship that was falling apart and I was just spinning, so I it's hard to untangle like why. I wish I could point to a reason and be like, this is what happened and this is why I got there. But I think it was just a whole confluence of factors.
Yeah, I mean, like, stress is stress. I can relate. Like, I feel like you're almost telling my story.
Exactly. Right?
Came onto the scene, was in a relationship that wasn't great, and then, old habits die hard. So, now that we got some of the big questions out of the way, you're back after treatment, going through it publicly to some extent. You've been on a few start lines. I don't like saying come back, especially in my own career, because, like, who knows what you're trying to define yourself as an athlete. And what does running and sport look like for you now? Is it about chasing podiums? Is it about, getting out there because you love it? Or what does it look like for you now?
That is a question that I ask myself on a daily basis. I think it's hard because I went through this huge pendulum of when I was doing all obstacle racing, everything was about winning, like win, 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 win. And I wasn't even happy when I won anymore. It was more of a relief that I didn't lose. And after my femoral stress fracture and sacral stress fracture and everything, I started to come back, and I told myself it was all about racing happy and, like, finding that joy in racing again. And a part of me almost felt like I swung too far to that other end of the pendulum where it was like, nothing matters. I just want to be out on a course. And now it's like, I feel like I'm coming back towards the middle where it's like, it's okay. Like, I can want to be competitive and I can want to do well and I can want to push myself, but also I can also appreciate and enjoy what I'm able to do, even if that falls short of what my quote unquote expectations of it are. And, honestly, it's been super humbling because I had in my mind after eating disorder treatment that if I get all my stuff together, if I feed myself appropriately, like, I will be back out there crushing everything once again. And it hasn't necessarily gone that way. I've been able to race long races that I probably would have never been able to do if before treatment, and run some 100s and stuff. But the performance aspect hasn't been there, which is, according to my very high exacting standards, because I'm sure people will be like, you're still doing pretty well, you know? And so I think you really in those moments have to identify why you are out there. And especially as you age too. It's like I just turned 39 and I'm like, how much of this is also I'm just slowing down,
Yeah. In ultras, that's a different conversation.
Right.
But, I've seen you talk about, I'm going to go back to some heavy questions. I've seen you talk about, in some posts, I think I read something in a comment recently about how your highest performing years coincided with your most neurotic behavior and also with your, maybe the height of your eating disorder relapse. And that's a hard thing to untangle. And what are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on, untangling them and building some of those, metric-based habits again without becoming obsessive?
Yeah, and that's a good question. It's funny. I actually, the other day, screenshotted an old race from one of my Stravas to my coach, David. And I was like, I don't understand. It was a race from 2018 and I crushed it, like destroyed it. But there's this part of me that's kind of angry. I'm like, I was running so well and taking absolute horrific care of myself. But I also know in those moments, I would run so well for like 6 months, break a bone, be out for 3 months, get back. Like it was a horrific pattern. And so it is hard for me I think that's the hardest part is maybe having faith in myself that I still am that athlete, but like, but I can be that athlete in like in a healthier way. I think a lot of what I've struggled with is like a crisis of confidence, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because you see time slow down, you see things like that, you see that you're not as dominant, and you're just like, well, I guess that maybe I just can't do that if I'm not in an active eating disorder. And you're like, no. But I don't want to go back there. And like, that's not an option. So how do I relate to the athlete that I am now?
Yeah.
And I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really complex. And not only in the training and like those little tiny obsessive things that, you know, you kind of in a lot of ways have to hold to be a great athlete, you know, not the unhealthy stuff, but the, you know, okay, I'm going to, you know, do my PT, but, you know, even though I'm tired and I just worked a full day.
Yeah.
And there's just this really fine line that I feel like, you know, people who are great at their craft, whatever that craft is, dance, you know, they dance around that line. And so like, you know, that's why there's so many disorders, OCD, eating disorders, and, you know, all these high level sports and, you know, acting, writing, you know, there's a lot of disorder in all of them. And it goes back to like, also for me, I'm, you know, I think about, I think about you in this because you've been dubbed Queen of Pain. And I don't know how much you've talked about this. I'm sure a lot, but in those moments, like for me, when it gets really hard, you know, those hard moments in a race seemed less hard for me because they were so, you know, there was, you know, you just feel less in general.
Yeah.
And, you know, do you still call yourself Queen of Pain? Is that something?
I have a weird relationship with that because it was kind of like, it was a name given to me by a reporter who was like a filmmaker. And like, I do pride myself on being able to endure some horrific conditions. I mean, you look at like some of the 24-hour obstacle races I did and I'm like, how did I get through that? You know, like,
Yep.
And, but I do believe in part of what you're saying that sometimes like our greatest assets, the things that make us great are also like our downfall. And so being able to almost like numb myself out, you know, in situations by just like doing hard things with my body made it so it was like, I don't have to kind of like think about what's going on in my brain, you know? And so I think there's this part of me that's almost trying to like reclaim that, I don't want to say that title, but like understand my relationship to. And then it's like, I think pain is a wonderful tool and a wonderful asset. It can also be, it can also drive you bonkers, you know? And so I think that it's learning how to relate to that. And also just to be like, sometimes be like, you know, I really don't feel like doing that to myself today. Like, I'd rather just sit on the couch and watch TV, like, and that's fine, you know? And like, that's almost the hardest part.
That is the hardest part for both myself and my fiance, Carson. Neither of us can sit on the couch and you're like, why? Why is that so hard for us, you know?
Yeah.
And it's that expectation of like, what should I be doing? You know, that's like so hard to let go of.
Yeah. And I think part of that too, like for me, a thing that's helping me with that too is doing adventures that are not necessarily races too.
Yeah.
To kind of be like, I can be out there and be moving and like, but it's just for me. It's not for any type of performance. It's not for any type of like sponsor or anything like that, you know, and like relating differently to sport.
And how are you balancing that now with also wanting to reclaim that competitive side of yourself?
Not quite sure. No. You know, it's interesting because I think especially now, you know, like my boyfriend is big into bike packing. And so I've started to do bike adventures, which don't necessarily, like if I'm going to go do a bike adventure for 7 days, like I can't really run that entire time too. Yeah. And so it's kind of like reformulated. And part of me, I think this summer, I was like, I would rather go ride my bike across Iowa than train for a 100-miler. And that was like a weird realization for me that like sometimes it's okay just to do something because it sounds fun as opposed to like, I need to race to somehow prove to myself or to other people that I'm still a good runner. I don't know. You know?
And so That said, do you find that like when you're in the actual race, do you love the race? You know, that's something that I had to like refine and like figure out for myself in the last year. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually like the racing too. Yeah. But I didn't know, you know, for a while. Would you say you like that part? And was there a moment for you that it clicked where you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that I like to do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, aside from those moments, especially in 100 milers where you're like, everything sucks and I'm dying and I want this to be over and I want to quit.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody has one of those, I think, regardless of how much you love it. I think the moment that I realized that was in 2019, I went back to run World's Toughest Mudder, you know, a race I'd won 3 times. And like, it was hard for me to go back to that race. And I actually bowed out at 40 miles. I was like, it was 12 hours in, it was 40 miles in. I was like, I'm done. And, you know, things weren't feeling great. And I was just like, I'm done. And I realized at that point, like, I was okay with that. Yeah. Because, and I think that was big for me because I was like, I don't have to prove anything. Like, this just wasn't my day. And like, I had a blast out there. I had so much fun. But for me to be able to just bow out and then be like, that was my day, and then not feel like I need to somehow avenge that. I think that was a part of me that was like, okay, yeah, I do that. Or I like that. And with me, the racing, it's also, and I had to ask this myself all the time, especially about obstacle racing. Like, if I wasn't winning in this sport, would I still do it? And for me, that's why I kind of like tailor what I run to like I love the big adventurous 100 milers because it is more of like a self journey. It's like you and the course, not you versus other people. And that to me, so I realized I'm like, that's what I love, you know, regardless of how the day ends up.
Yeah. You know? Yeah, that's amazing. That's like the amazing thing about ultra running. You're gonna like, even if you're close to other women and it's a race the whole time, it's still a journey of self-exploration. Right. Yeah. That said, like and this is just my own curiosity, when you're in those moments when you're racing another woman, how, some people, they like to go out in front because, that little race in the middle is very difficult for them. And some people like love the chase. What's your preference and how do you respond when you're tight with a bunch of women? Or is that something you don't even think about right now?
Yeah, I've always been a chaser. I always like to chase. I've actually, I think in the past I was running, 100K, and I was a group of 5 speedy women. I just stepped off the trail and tied my shoe, quote unquote, because I would just rather let them go ahead and then me run my own race. But I think it's hard for me because I think I don't necessarily have the killer instinct anymore. If I'm racing with another woman, I really don't have that drive to be rah, I'm probably more she beats me, that's fine. I beat her, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why I've shied away from shorter stuff. But I know, I think, I have this goal. I'm going to do some shorter races coming up to just put myself in those scenarios and just see how I feel. Especially even if I get my butt kicked, which shorter stuff is not my jam, but just to explore my relationship with that instead of just avoiding it,
Yeah.
What do you have I'm afraid I'm not good at what?
Sorry, what do you have coming up?
Well, I'm running a trail marathon tomorrow, which to me is short.
Blue Sky? Yeah, that's short for me too. Don't worry.
I was I have to run hard.
Yeah, that'll be fun though.
It should be, but I haven't done anything under 7-8 hours in years at this point. So
I'm wondering, as if you begin to reclaim that confidence, if you'll find yourself liking that chase a little bit more, and that and finding that killer instinct. Yeah. Because for me, that I had to untangle that completely, and it wasn't until I was in a race setting racing other women where I was like, oh, I'm having fun, and still not caring about the outcome as much as I would have before. So
yeah, I think that's because I think I used to especially fear other women. I was, especially in the OCR world, because the short races, we would be like, you were right on each other, and you would start an obstacle. You would be like rolling over each other in a barbed wire crawl.
That's
and
crazy.
Like, I think I became super fearful of like going head to head with other women, because it was like, I didn't want them to be my enemies, or like, and so now, I mean, it's really, now I just see everybody as like my best friend out there.
Yeah.
And if somebody passes me in the race, I'm like, you go, you know? And I'm also like, okay, wait, can I catch you? And then I'm like, maybe not, maybe. But yeah, I think maybe the whole super competitive thing isn't in my DNA right now, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll find out that I really enjoy it and can reclaim that and not let it ruin my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens. I'll text you tomorrow after Blue Sky. How to field a race.
I know how to field a race, not just like me. Because the last race I ran was Bighorn 100, where I literally went 15 miles without seeing another person on the trail.
Yeah.
So you don't really feel like you're in a race.
Yeah, that race is remote.
Yeah.
I've paced it a few times.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Do you feel like that, being fearful of other women, did that extend into personal or your other professional life as an attorney? That's another like really complex aspect of racing at a professional level, especially as a woman when there's fewer opportunity, and it's just like a side effect that's really weird. That, I experienced like in my brief collegiate career, and just like all of a sudden being pitted against women for limited spots. I was like, oh, I like don't know how to talk to girls anymore. This is weird.
No, I mean, it's interesting because I kind of regret, I look back on, especially my days in obstacle racing, and I regret the fact that I didn't get closer to my competitors as friends.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful. And Rose Wetzel is one of them, and she lives here in Boulder. And she was like, I never understood why I always thought that I hated her. And I'm like, I didn't hate you. I was scared of you, and that's like, because I didn't feel adequate myself, I think, in a lot of ways. And so it's kind of now in like flipping that script. I mean, like coming from an attitude of abundance, of it's like, there is plenty to go around for everyone. And I'm not having to fight tooth and nail with like, if somebody beats me, that doesn't mean they're a better person than me. It was like, they just were a better runner that day,
Yeah.
And I think it's hard. I mean, look, like the attorney world can be that way, especially in law firms, not super gender specific, but it's kind of like the cream rises to the top. And so there's that. I don't know, maybe I'm like, people are always like, do you take anything from the attorney world into running, or from running into the attorney world? I'm like, I don't really know, but sometimes I feel like one impacts the other, and I don't know which way it is.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And you are one of the, especially right now in ultra running, going pro means something different than it did even at 5 years ago when I won Western. Like, the top 10 at UTMB and CCC, like none of them really had other full-time jobs. But you have always been just an extremely high achiever. And high achievers at any level, at anything, have something that works a little bit different in their brain. And, we've touched on this a little bit. And what do you think that is for you? And is that also part of what you have been trying to untangle and reclaim? And what do you attribute to your ability to just like be a super high performing lawyer for Apple, and then come and, be good at pretty much anything that you try and do, which is true, and that's a mentality thing. And like some people are just like that. I always told people that I have no idea. My parents just will tell you that I was born this way, that I like from a very young age, I had something that made me like, they were always like, Amelia, it's okay to get a B or a C in school. And I was like, no, must get an A. So it was never like external pressure. I do think for me, I do the best. I have this like vast curiosity about like, I love the pursuit of mastery. And so for me, what motivates me is
that pursuit of trying to figure something out. And so like with obstacle racing, that was like, okay, well, how do I do this? And then I figured that out. And so I kind of was like, okay, so ultra running, how do I untangle this? Like, how do I nail a 100-miler? Still don't know. Still need to figure that out. And I think that that's the way that I see school and career and everything is like, I just want to figure out how to master this. And then that is what keeps me focused and driven.
And a lot of this stuff, though, mastery can be objective. And so is mastery, is that externally motivated for you or internally motivated? Or what does mastery mean to you?
Oh, that's a good question because I feel like I'm using external metrics because I'm like, if I nail a 100-miler and like set a course record on something, then if I run it really fast, that means I've mastered it. Versus like the idea that like maybe you can just come to peace about something and just feel really good where you are with it, even if externally that doesn't show. Like, for instance, like I learned how to mountain bike this year and now I'm like pretty proud of where my skills are at, even though I know that they're still pretty poor compared to what like most mountain bikers are.
Yeah.
And so it's this part of me that's like, I feel like I got that, even though I know that like, like by all metrics, it's probably not.
And it's interesting that you I asked that question and then you went to 100-milers, which, even if you master a single 100-miler on one day and have an excellent day, you're guaranteed that the next one is going to fall apart, that there's just, so it's really interesting, speaking of mastery. And I think it shows that, you'll never be done trying to perfect stuff.
And it's probably more of a mind, like it's probably harder on yourself to like go out there and run a perfect race, like your first time, and then be like, I can't, how do I replicate that?
Yeah.
Because you're just not going to. And I'm like, I don't want to set you up and throw a question to you, but I mean, like, I feel like from what I know with you and like Western states and everything like that, then that was like a hard thing to grapple with. Like,
oh, totally. And, I won Western and, I wanted to win Western. I was going out to win Western, but, it's like you don't always expect your dreams to come true on the day, especially I'd been running hundreds for a while at that point. And like, I knew that it was like 50-50 whether or not you have a good day. And it was what you've said, I've really related to because I won Western and then I felt like I had to win everything and then nothing else was enough. And then I totally stopped feeling, I was like undefeated in the US for like 3 years and I, felt like a failure still somehow,
It's so crazy. Like because you talk to like probably many ultra runners and I like who have won so many things and they probably still have some weird imposter syndrome going on about themselves as an athlete too.
Yeah, totally. And that, poses a different question with ultra running specifically or with high level sport. Do you feel like there, people who are performing at the high level, especially in ultra running, and especially women, there seems to be a pattern with disorder, whatever that means, and a pattern of, neuroticism that leads to extreme burnout or injury or, eating disorder is a really common one. And do you feel like it's possible to get into ultra running and achieve really amazing things without being touched by any of these?
I mean, the optimist in myself would be like, sure, there are examples, and maybe I can think of a person or two that in my mind maybe has done that, but I also have no idea what's going on behind the scenes there.
Yeah.
And I think, what we kind of run into is this scenario where it's a moving goalpost. So like I think I just told myself, I'm like, okay, once I win one more world title in obstacle racing, like I can be like Michael Jordan, just walk away. I'm fine. I'm good. Like one more win and I will suddenly not feel like an imposter. I will suddenly feel like, like that's enough. but that's the problem. It's like a moving goalpost, and it's never going to be enough. And so if you're pinning everything in your life on winning or on, just like, if I win Western States, if I win UTMB, like, I'll feel like, no, it's not. It's going to be a fleeting satisfaction. And I think that kind of mentality is the same thing that feeds into disorder in the sport too. That it's like, I lose 5 pounds, like maybe I'll run a little bit faster and et cetera, but like, and then that will be fine. I'll stop there. But eating disorders are very much like high performance in athletes, and that like that goalpost is going to move, and like you're never going to be satisfied once you get there. And I think that that's kind of a mentality, if you're focused on those external metrics, that those people tend to be more vulnerable to the disorder that's rampant in running, versus, and I don't know, this is my own hypothesis, but like people who just find like intense internal satisfaction regardless of like external metrics maybe are able to avoid it more. But I don't know. But are those the people who will still rise to the top of the sport? Still don't know,
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's like a little scary to try and unravel because, who knows what's going on in the heads of the people at the top. And especially like you and I who've experienced similar things and patterns, and we hear every day that people are relating to our stories. So especially you, I want to pivot for a second and just ask about your relationship with David. I've worked with David for a long time, on and off. I was coached by him like 2015, 16, 17, 18. We separated for a little bit, 19 till like a few months ago. And, for a while, like, and David has always been a great friend, but we butt heads sometimes, because, I'm strong-willed and, and so is he.
Right.
And what's that relationship with David look like for you, and how has that evolved? And David Roach is, one of the most recognized coaches in the industry, and he coaches so many people. And I'm always curious to hear about his relationship with other athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting for me because maybe I'm not so strong-willed as an athlete. Like I have a thing where I'm like very obedient as an athlete. And I'm like, oh no, if coach says I shouldn't do it, then I shouldn't do it, So I think for me, it's been very much, and I love him to death, I'm like, I will absolutely, he can coach me for the rest of my life and be 90 years old and still trying to run 100s or something like that. But for me, it's just all about, honestly, I think sometimes he functions more as my therapist. Sorry, David. But it just has helped me understand so much why I do what I do, and also to help me get back to a place where I'm not scared of racing is like my big thing. Because I think, when you've come from a point where you are a high performer and you have, excelled really, in your sport, there comes a point where if you're not in that place, you're almost kind of scared of a start line. If I'm like, I'm going to go run this trail marathon tomorrow, I know there are a lot of other fast women out there. I'm not a fast person. Like, do I even want to risk the ego hit by getting out there? But like, you can say that for anywhere. Like, if I keep telling myself I'm just never going to get back to a start line. So I think for me, I actually sometimes he helps push me and be like, remember what racing is about. It's not about winning necessarily. Like that's like, but like it's all that journey, and that celebration. And so for me, that's really what it's been about. Haven't really butted heads so much, but and he's one of the only people who knew that I was going into treatment as well. So like he's known all of my deepest, darkest secrets since 2016, I started working with him.
Yeah. And you can just tell me to shut up if this is too much, but was he, his encouragement, was that a factor when you decided to go to treatment?
I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was funny because I remember walking or calling my parents and being like, I'm going back into treatment. I need it. And they had no idea. I mean, they could probably know I wasn't doing well just based on how I looked. But there were very few people who knew about my decision. He was one of the people who was like the biggest cheerleader of it. And it's been pretty incredible. Like the facility that I went has now, they told me they've had dozens of athletes come through because of like me talking about the place. And I know that there have been like other athletes in this area who have actually gone there. And it's all like because other people were encouraging them. I think that's so important. And it's incredible for a coach to like step up and do that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like most runners would be comfortable telling their coach that. And I was scared because I was like, if I tell him I have a problem, he's going to not let me run. He's going to take away mileage from me. He's going to, but like that wasn't the case at all. It was like, how can we keep running in your life and get you to be able to do it in a way where you're not breaking a bone every 3 months, you know?
And what does that look like?
Right. Still a learning process. I mean, like I am a lower mileage athlete, probably always will be. And by that, I mean, I'm probably like 50 to 60 miles a week, like base. Yeah. And I'm not going to be a person that doubles ever, probably. And I just have to understand that that's just going to be my baseline. And there may be times where we can like kind of change that or do, extra cross training. But just respect my history and to try and not get in that comparison game. And also understanding from a coach relationship, like if I am struggling, if I'm not feeding myself well, like I need to own up and be like, probably not a good idea that I run 20 miles this weekend, you know, like, and communicating that and then also not fearing repercussions about that. Yeah. Cause I think that that's a huge thing that people fear.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's like really impressive of you to be able to step up to that. And that's like a true ode to David, like that you can, that you trust him that much, you know, that shit is hard.
Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to feel like they're being watched or like having things taken away from them. But I also know what that leads me down to, like what hiding and lying. And I know that path and I've been down that path and I don't want to do that anymore.
So I know that you were off Strava for a long time and now you're on Strava. What was that decision like? Why? And was it just another way to engage? I love Strava. I'm like, that if I would delete every other social media and I'd keep Strava.
Totally.
Do you get obsessed with metrics or was that like, did you have to think about that when you decided to make your Strava public?
Yeah, so I actually joined Strava in like 2017, but under a fake name, and it was private, and only David could follow me. People figured it out though after a while, but and I think that was very purposely to like try and like to not get caught in the comparison game and the trap, and I was I think at that point I was also worried about what other people were thinking of me with like my running. And also if I was injured and disappeared off of Strava, because at that point I was in such a bad injury cycle that like I was off of running every few months. And I was so obsessed with what other people would think of me. And I think I went under my real name and I went public in like 2020 because we didn't have racing. And it was just like, I felt kind of disconnected from the running community. And I was like, okay, well, let's just give this a try. If it hurts my psyche, then like, let's step back. And honestly, like I don't really scroll through Strava. Like I make a point, I don't stalk other people on Strava. Yeah. So I pretty much like put my stuff out there. Like if you want to see it, you can see it, but like, I'm not going to like check in on other people. Cause I think that that's where I probably would get into trouble, especially in Boulder where it's like, I also had to learn never check segment leaderboards because it's depressing.
Like truly depressing.
When I first moved out here, I remember I went to go run in Boulder Valley Ranch, and I made the mistake of like looking at the segment leaderboards, and David's like, "Oh, never check that."
Yeah, I know.
So,
and it's even changed like since I moved to Boulder, and like I joined Strava in like 2016 or something, and like, you know, the segments have just, you know, are minutes faster than they were.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, same here. I just don't check.
Yeah. But I think it's like, it's kind of freeing to be like, I'm running a 10-minute pace and I don't care what you guys think about it or anything like that. You know?
Oh my gosh. I've gone through that in the last few years, and that's been just incredible. And especially coming from like a collegiate track where it's just like, you know, if you're not running 6:30s, like, then, you know, you're having an off day.
Right.
You know? But so that said, with Strava, you know, that's just one form of social media. But you are so loved, like truly revered on social media by so many people, especially women. And you mentioned that, you know, people were inspired to go seek treatment at Opal specifically because that's where you received your eating disorder treatment. What is that like? You know, I get a tiny taste of that, and I'm, you know, when I think about it too hard, I'm like, oh God, you know, I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. But you are in it, and you are, you know, very active and open. And what is that like? And do you feel like it's some kind of responsibility? And how has that ebbed and flowed throughout the years?
Yeah, I think there was something I said when I was at Opal, actually. And it was to another woman in like a process group. And I said, I was like, you know, there's a time to educate, there's a time to advocate, and then there's a time to get the fuck out. Apologies, I don't know if I can swear on this podcast.
Fuck yeah, you can swear.
And I think for me, I've like have written that quote down, and I have to know when is it time for me to educate? When is it time for me to advocate? When is it time for me just to get the fuck out of the situation? And to me, that's all about boundaries in social media. And because it can be hard. I think when I initially came out about everything, everyone in a well-meaning way, like, wants to share their story or to get advice and things along those lines. But I had to kind of say, okay, I need to put my recovery first. I need to get in a solid place first. And once I am there, then I can help as long as it's not affecting my own recovery. And there have been times where I've had to extricate myself from situations because I know it's too triggering for me. That like, I really want to help a person, but I know that me getting entangled in that is going to set me back.
And is that like on one-on-one, like someone asking for advice?
Yeah, one-on-one. You know, it's been via social media, you know, it's been sometimes in person, but also just, and that's hard. Those are hard boundaries to draw. And, but I think overall, like, I've had amazing experiences with social media and just being able to relate to people. And the way that I've always viewed it is, look, like, I'm just paying it forward because I found Opal through another professional runner who opened up about her struggles. So I like want to share that, you know, and to keep that helped me find the courage at 35 to go back into treatment. And so, and I think that social media is a beautiful vehicle to do it. Yeah. And in some ways, like, it's also in a weird way kind of selfish for me because I process through writing and through sharing those things. And so oftentimes things that I talk about are actually things that I'm struggling with at the time. And I'm just trying to figure it out. And it helps to have a sounding board sometimes. So overall, like, interactions have been phenomenal with people.
And that sounding board, you know, people's reactions to what you say, is that part of what is therapeutic to you, that validation from fans and followers?
Yeah, it's so funny because I have such a cringeworthy reaction to the term validation. I'm like, I don't need you to validate me. I can validate myself. But sometimes look, it helps to know. And this, I got into a fight with somebody about this, like, actually, like, not a fight, but a disagreement with somebody about this a few years ago, who thought that I was too obsessed with social media interaction. Like, why would I put all my stuff out there? Like, is it for attention? Am I trying to get attention from people? And I go, no, and I like, honestly, it's so I don't feel so alone with some things. Like when I went through, for instance, like I froze my eggs last year, and I was terrified about like how that would affect my relationship with my body. And I like wrote about that on social media, and so many people who had been in that scenario were able to say, totally understand that. I feel you. I did this. This is what helped me, you know? And so I'm like, in a weird way, it's feeling part of a community that has been through that stuff. And that's really what's helped me.
Yeah. And it's just like really incredible how many people you've helped. And just, you know, from me following you, you've made me ask myself questions about like, you know, do I want kids? I was hit by, was in a car accident and then hit by a UPS truck all in like a 4-month span. Yeah. And like I was told it was going to be extremely hard for me to get pregnant after that trauma. And it's like really made me think about this and ask those questions. And I know, you know, that, you know, for me personally, when I'm similar to you, like that long form process, that form of processing, like, is just super important. And for me, like I do have that cringe to validation too, and to saying fans and followers, you know?
Right? I think we all do. We're all like, ugh. Because that's the funny thing is, that's the thing is like you say fans and followers, but then it's also like I'm a fan and a follower of so many other people too. Totally. So it's like I'm trying to like take away that negative connotation.
Yeah, and it's all just like discussion, you know, and it, you know, that validation. It is validation, but it's also discussion, you know, and that's important to recognize.
And validation is it is a basic human need. Like, it is a basic human need to be validated and to feel like you are seen, heard, and understood. And I feel like that gets a negative rap, and it's not at all.
Totally.
You know? So.
I talked to my sister a few months ago. She was staying with us and she was like, you need a lot of validation, Kat. I was like, yes, I do.
You're like, yeah. And I know now how to ask for it. I know. Too.
Yeah,
Validate me.
I need it. Yeah. So on the subject of social media, you know, both you and your partner are very popular people to follow on social media. And both of you have been very public about relationships on social media. Yeah. You know, that's something that I've struggled with. You know, with Western States, blew up onto the scene, and all of a sudden my life was public in a way that I didn't ever expect. And so like transitioning into, you know, a new relationship was hard for me to share publicly because, you know, people had expectations of me, and that was hard to, and felt like they knew me in a certain way. How do you and Ryan process that together? And is that something you talk about?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting when we first started dating, because I knew like he had gone through a very public breakup with social media involved. I had aired a lot of dirty laundry on social media as well. And I remember talking about that, and he had like a beautiful viewpoint, which is like, this is life, and like you love hard, and sometimes love doesn't work out, but like we shouldn't hide that for fear of that. And I think that, you know, like that was a very good viewpoint for me to understand that like you can't like be like, okay, like I'm not going to say anything about it or like share my love because I'm afraid like it could implode one day or things could go wrong. And so I think like that's kind of where I've come to, in that everyone's going to go through things, relationships are going to change, everyone's, and like there's nothing to hide there. And you know, as long as everything's handled in a respectful way. But I think social media and relationships is tricky, and like public is tricky, you know, and Brian and I plan on being together forever, but like if it doesn't happen, like you have to figure out how to do that on social media. But I think people get that, or I hope they do.
Yeah. And you know, what I've learned is like the people who don't get it, fuck them. Like, and that's what I had to, like, I was getting all these like hate messages. And then I had to be like, they don't know me or my life or what I've been through. And so fuck them. Yeah, that's a really viewpoint.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, I'm trying to like just embrace, like, wear the heart on the sleeve. Like, there's no reason. This is the one life you get.
Totally.
Know? Like, being hamstrung by how other people may react to that is just no way to live.
Yeah.
You know?
And like, when something is special, just like when something is hard, when you're someone who loves to share, sharing the beautiful and the wonderful, like feels good too, like I wanted to like shout it on the rooftops, like in a classic cliche way, and like, that's the same when you're like going through something hard. And, yeah. So with Ryan, and again, just tell me to shut up if I need to.
There's very few topics that you could hit where I'd be like, yeah, no, I can't talk.
Yeah, exactly why I wanted to talk to you. How has he shown up for you and, learned with you as a partner of someone that has a history with eating disorder?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the wonderful thing about Ryan is just that he's so open to learning and to understanding and just like, what do you need? And like, I'm not going to treat you any different unless you want me to treat you any different. Like, I think I've always had fears, especially with partners, that I'm afraid they feel like they need to take it on, take on a problem or like kind of police me or make sure that I'm eating what I should be eating or like things like that. But I mean, honestly, it's just been him being open to listening and understanding about like how my brain works in certain ways. And then honestly, the onus is on me to vocalize like what I need, what helps, what doesn't help. And also just like when things are hard for me, because you can't expect your partner to read your mind.
Yeah.
Totally. And so it's like, if I'm having a really hard day, like I went through like a month where it was just really bad body image sensation stuff. And I was just like, I'm just going to tell you, this is what I'm going through. I don't necessarily need anything, but like, I just want you to know that, And I think that that's just so important to be able to, for me to be able to communicate and have a partner who is like willing and receptive to like understanding that and listening. And that sometimes I need to go in another room and like have a crying fit for 20 minutes and I'm going to merge totally fine. But like, that's just how I get everything out,
Yeah.
But it's just that constant dialogue. And so he's been fantastic with that.
Yeah. What's some advice that you would give to a partner that's, trying to be supportive and doesn't know how to show up?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a scenario that I tip my hat to anyone who is, trying to support somebody struggling with an eating disorder, or any type of mental health or addiction. Honestly, like the biggest thing is to take care of yourself and to realize like you can't make a person get better. You can't change them as much as you want to. It's more about being there and open and receptive to like letting them know that they are loved and supported unconditionally and that you are always there for them to talk and that you won't judge them. And I think that just creating that safe environment is so important from a relationship standpoint. And so, but it's hard because like I said, the burden is on the person who is struggling to actually vocalize what they need and to talk about it. And also to like understand, and I've had to learn this too, is that, I need to know how to like handle things and self-soothe on my own. I can't always just like expect my partner to fix things or like make my life better, that there are some things that I have to navigate on my own.
What is if you could pick one thing that someone has said to you, either in the last few years, post-treatment or, in the process of deciding to go to treatment or in treatment itself, can you pick out one thing that someone has said to you that you've gone back to?
Yeah. This is a really weird analogy, so bear with me. But it was actually from my therapist when I was at Opal. And so part of therapy at Opal is actually like you have like movement. Like we would go on runs together, which is unheard of in eating disorder treatment. But like it was like that's like a cool thing. And we were talking about my relationship with sport and like how I was perceived. And she's like, you have held yourself out forever as kind of like that pretty porcelain doll in a glass box that people look at and revere and love, but like, or admire, but they're like afraid if they touch it, they're going to break it. She's like, what you want to be, she's like, what you're looking for is like to be that like little rag doll that like the kids love to play with and throw around and can relate to and like hold close in bed every single night. And I was seeking community by like trying to be this like revered person instead of like actually digging in and getting to know people and understanding what was important. And so I try and like think about that all the time, is that like, is what I'm doing getting me closer to that goal of like community and relationship, or is it pushing me farther away?
Yeah.
Is it isolating myself from everyone, putting myself in that glass box, or am I actually like in it and living, you know? And so I think about that all the time, honestly.
Yeah, that's, really impactful. And I know that, it's hard to, be like, I would rather not be perfect and then, love and be loved. We're coming up on time here and I have one more question. What is something that you haven't talked about that you are super proud of that no one would know except for maybe like Ryan and your parents?
I'm super proud of. Gosh, I was a jump rope champion in 5th grade.
Woo, that totally counts.
I mean, I think I'm really proud of myself just for, and people know this, but just the number of times that I have relapsed in my life and the number of times that I have gone, but like, I just don't want to give up. And I'm sure at some point or another, like I'm going to relapse again. Like I'm going to have to dig myself out of it. Like I hope not, but like it's on the horizon. But it's just like, it has never been a question for me of like not picking myself back up and like making this a lifelong process, So.
Again, that's like so amazing and so brave, because that is hard, to have gone through that so many times and to not give into it. Well, thank you so much for, being such an open book and for coming to my house and on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun. It was great.
This was a blast. All right. Peace and love. Thanks.
Yeah.
You look around. You look around.